In a small, dusty village tucked away from the city's glaring lights, Nkem's family was barely surviving. Her mother, Mama Nkem, was a frail but determined woman whose wrinkles told a tale of unending hardship. With 3 children to care for and a husband who had abandoned them, Mama Nkem had learned to adapt to the harshness of life. Nkem, the eldest at 18, was her pillar of support. Nkem had always been a bright and ambitious girl. Though her dreams were often stifled by poverty, she yearned to change her family's fate. "Mama, let me help you at the market," she often pleaded, but Mama Nkem insisted she stay home to care for her younger siblings. One day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mama Nkem returned from the village square with a grim expression. She sat Nkem down, her voice a mix of desperation and resolve. "Nkem, we cannot keep living like this. We need money." "What can I do, Mama?" Nkem asked, her innocent eyes wide with concern. "There's a way." Mama Nkem hesitated. She spoke of the landlord, a wealthy but morally dubious man. "He likes you, Nkem. He can help us if you spend time with him." Nkem's stomach churned. "Mama, no, I can't." But Mama Nkem's tears were relentless, and her words were sharper than a knife. "Do you want your siblings to starve? Do you want us thrown out of this house?" Nkem reluctantly agreed, her heart heavy with guilt and fear. The night came quickly, and with it, the suffocating silence of shame. Nkem sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. The landlord arrived, his gaze predatory. He handed her an envelope filled with money, and though she felt dirty and broken, Nkem clutched it tightly, thinking of her family's empty stomachs. The next morning, Mama Nkem embraced her, her face glowing with pride. "You're a blessing, my daughter. This will change our lives." Nkem said nothing, her soul crushed under the weight of her mother's words. Days turned into weeks, and Nkem found herself trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. The landlord's demands grew, and Mama Nkem's praises became louder. With each encounter, Nkem felt herself slipping further away from the girl she once was. Mama Nkem began to encourage Nkem to meet other men. She introduced her to wealthy traders and travelers who passed through the village. Nkem hated it, but every time she tried to resist, Mama Nkem's manipulative words reeled her back in. "We are so close to escaping this poverty, Nkem. Just a little longer," Mama Nkem would say, her voice dripping with false reassurance. One fateful day, Nkem met Annabelle, a city girl who had returned to the village for a brief visit. Annabelle was everything Nkem wasn't: bold, confident, and unapologetically materialistic. She noticed Nkem's beauty and saw an opportunity. "Why waste your time here?" Annabelle said. "Come to the city with me. You'll make real money." Nkem was hesitant, but Mama Nkem was thrilled. "Go with her. This is your chance to help us even more." When Nkem arrived in the city, she was overwhelmed by the bustling streets and towering buildings. Annabelle took her under her wing, introducing her to nightclubs and high-paying clients. Nkem felt like a fish out of water, but the money was undeniable. She sent a large portion of her earnings back home, and Mama Nkem's praises reached new heights. "You're our savior, Nkem," she would write in her letters. "Your siblings are back in school because of you." But Nkem's heart was heavy. The city was a dangerous place, and the men she encountered were often cruel and demanding. One night, Nkem met Chief Ease, a wealthy and influential man. He was older and intimidating, but his money spoke louder than her fears. He offered her double the amount she usually earned, on one condition: she would be exclusive to him. Nkem agreed, hoping this arrangement would simplify her chaotic life. But Chief Ease was controlling, monitoring her every move and demanding her undivided attention. Back in the village, Mama Nkem was living comfortably on Nkem's earnings, oblivious to the toll it was taking on her daughter. When Nkem returned for a brief visit, she tried to confide in her mother. "Mama, I can't keep doing this. It's too much." Nkem, don't be ungrateful. Mama Nkem snapped. Do you want us to go back to suffering? Nkem's heart broke. She realized her mother would never understand her pain. Nkem began having vivid dreams where her ancestors appeared, warning her of the path she was on. In one dream, an old woman with piercing eyes said, "The wealth you seek will destroy you." Nkem woke up in a cold sweat, but she brushed it off as mere superstition. However, the dreams continued, growing more intense with each passing night. One day, the landlord from her village appeared in the city. He had heard of Nkem's success and demanded she return to him. Nkem refused, and his threats sent chills down her spine. "You think you're too good for me now?" he spat. "I'll make sure your family pays for this." The landlord's threats escalated, and Nkem found herself constantly looking over her shoulder. One night, as she walked home from a client's house, she was attacked by men sent by the landlord. A passerby, Kelechi, intervened and saved her. Kelechi was kind and offered her a place to stay. For the first time in years, Nkem felt safe. Nkem sat in Kelechi's modest apartment, her hands trembling as she recounted her story. The dimly lit room felt like a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the chaos of her life in the city. Kelechi listened intently, his kind eyes filled with concern. "You don't have to go back," he said softly. "There's more to life than this." Nkem shook her head. "You don't understand. My family depends on me. If I stop, they'll suffer." Kelechi leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "What kind of life is this? You've already given so much. Isn't it time to think about yourself?" His words struck a chord in Nkem. For years, her life had revolved around her family's needs, but now, for the first time, she considered the possibility of living for herself. Back in the village, Mama Nkem was growing restless. The money Nkem had been sending was no longer arriving as frequently. She wrote letter after letter, demanding an explanation. When one of Nkem's younger siblings fell ill, Mama Nkem became desperate. She borrowed money from neighbors, promising to repay them once Nkem sent more. The village began to whisper about their family's sudden wealth and the mysterious absence of the eldest daughter. One evening, Mama Nkem sat by the fire, muttering to herself, "Nkem can't abandon us now. We've come too far." In the city, Nkem struggled with her decision. Kelechi had offered her a job at his small shop, but the pay was a fraction of what she was used to earning. She spent sleepless nights debating whether to return to her old life. One evening, Annabelle visited her. "You're wasting your time with that boy," she scoffed. "Do you know how much Chief Ease is willing to pay to have you back?" Nkem felt a pang of temptation but pushed it aside. "I can't do this anymore, Annabelle. I need a fresh start." Annabelle laughed bitterly. "Fresh start? In this city? Don't be naive, Nkem. You'll come crawling back." Meanwhile, the landlord in the village was plotting his revenge. Enraged by Nkem's rejection, he began spreading rumors about her family. He told anyone who would listen that their wealth came from immoral means. The whispers grew louder, and soon, the village elders called for a meeting. Mama Nkem was summoned to defend her family's honor. At the meeting, Mama Nkem denied the accusations vehemently. "My daughter works hard in the city to support us," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "She's a blessing, not a curse." But the elders were not convinced. "If she is truly honorable, why has she not returned to the village in so long?" one elder asked. Mama Nkem left the meeting humiliated and furious. She wrote a scathing letter to Nkem, demanding she return home to prove their innocence. Nkem received her mother's letter late one evening. She sat by the window, reading the harsh words over and over again. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the depth of her mother's expectations. "They're blaming me for everything," she whispered to Kelechi. "I can't keep running." Kelechi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe them your life, Nkem. But if you need to confront your past, I'll stand by you." Nkem returned to the village with Kelechi by her side. The journey was long, and her heart grew heavier with each passing mile. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Villagers stared at her with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Mama Nkem greeted her with open arms, but her smile was strained. "You've finally come home," she said, pulling Nkem into a tight embrace. "Now we can silence the rumors." Nkem didn't respond. She felt like a stranger in her own home. The next day, Nkem stood before the village elders, her heart pounding in her chest. They questioned her about her life in the city, their words laced with suspicion. "I did what I had to do to support my family," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But I'm not proud of it." The elders murmured among themselves. One elder, a wise old woman, spoke up. "Your honesty is commendable, but your choices have brought shame to this village. You must find a way to atone." Later that evening, Nkem overheard a heated argument between Kelechi and her mother. Mom Nkem was furious that Kelechi had encouraged Nkem to leave her old life behind. "She's my daughter," Mama Nkem shouted. "She owes me everything." "She's not your slave," Kelechi retorted. "You've taken enough from her." Nkem felt a surge of anger and heartbreak. She confronted her mother, her voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to me? I sacrificed everything for you, and it was never enough." Mama Nkem's face crumpled, but she said nothing. Nkem decided to leave the village for good, taking Kelechi's hand as they walked away from the only home she had ever known. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Nkem felt a glimmer of hope. She vowed to build a life that was hers and hers alone, a life free from manipulation and regret. The night was quiet as Nkem and Kelechi left the village. The stars lit their path, but the weight of Nkem's past made her steps heavy. She glanced at Kelechi, who carried a small bag of their belongings. His presence was comforting, yet Nkem's mind raced with uncertainty. "What if I fail?" she whispered, breaking the silence. Kelechi stopped, turning to face her. "You've survived so much already, Nkem. You're stronger than you think. This is your chance to rebuild." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. For the first time in years, she felt like someone truly believed in her. What will be Nkem's fate in the city? Stay tuned for part 2. To support our channel, please like, comment, and subscribe.